Let's now talk about something very important that transpired today. The United States has ordered China to close its Houston consulate. Beijing calls it a political provocation that will further harm diplomatic relationship between these two countries. The move comes as tensions soar between the world's two biggest economies on a number of fronts, including a controversial national security law in the semi-autonomous Hong Kong. And no sooner than this message of the consulate closure came out, videos started surfacing on how the Chinese consulate officials were burning documents in Houston. Firefighters and police were called to the consulate building as the documents were being burned in the building's courtyard. The Twitter feed of the Houston police force said smoke was observed, but officers were not granted access to enter the building. The question this incident raises is what was so urgent and critical that China wanted to hide, and in fact, from the United States and the world. Well, we'll talk about this with our guest. Joining me on the panel is Ambassador Deepak Vora, former diplomat, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, Professor Madhav Nalapat, Editorial Director of the Sunday Guardian, Major General Dhruv Katoj, Defense and Strategic Expert, Director of the India Foundation, and last but not the least, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Foreign Editor for the Hindustan Times. Professor Nalapat, let me start by asking you, why did the Chinese, show so much desperation in pulling out their shredders when the consulate was ordered to be closed?
Well, I'd like to say that we cannot forget, Vineet, the close relationship between China and Pakistan. And, Joe Biden has been saying some pretty nasty things about India. And I have a fairly decent network of friends in the US. So I found out from them that there are a lot of Pakistani Americans in the Biden team, and that these Pakistani Americans are in very close touch with the Pakistan embassy, which puts them in touch with people in the Chinese embassy. So their job is essentially to tell Joe Biden that, look, the real enemy of the United States is not China. Forget it. China is our buddy. The real enemy is, guess what? India. So the reality is extensive interlinking is going on between the Pakistan and the Chinese diplomats. I think Ambassador Vora will testify to this. And, I'm sure Pramit is well aware of this in Nepal and other locations. So the point is, Vineet, they have a lot to hide. And the sad reality is at least one major electoral campaign, the Biden campaign, needs to strengthen its own security systems against this kind of a fifth column, because this fifth column is at work on behalf of the Chinese.
Ambassador Vora, what possibly could China be hiding, and what kind of a provocation are they talking about? Obviously, if the United States has made such a crucial, such a pertinent move, shutting down a consulate is in fact a huge step or a large message being sent out to the CCP. What do you think China was really hiding? We all know, and Professor Nalapat also pointed out, that the proximity between China and Pakistan and the Pakistani presence in Joe Biden's campaign could perhaps be another thing which stems out of this entire fiasco. But in your assessment, what is going on in Houston?
Thank you, Mr. Malhotra, for this opportunity to be on your program along with such wonderful panelists. The first thing is, why does any country open a consulate in another country? The capital of the receiving country has the embassy or the high commission. The consulate is normally open, and this is historical practice. Either way, your ships or your aircraft are calling frequently, there is trade, then you have to give all kinds of certificates, ensure that the trade is not hampered, or you have a substantial diaspora. May I remind you that almost exactly 3 years ago, the Russians had asked the Americans to reduce the staff in the American embassy in Moscow by, I don't remember, 700 people or something like that. And when the Americans retaliated and said, buddy, shut down your Consulate General in San Francisco and 2 diplomatic annexes in New York and Washington. But if they had to reduce their staff by 700 odd people, then the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. would close. I mean, they didn't have so many people. Now, what is happening here is that what we understand, Professor Nalapat has a much better network in the United States. I've served there and I have many, many friends in high places. We keep in touch via email and other things. What they're saying is that the Consulate General of China in Houston was not acting within the bounds of diplomatic propriety. So we have a thing when we declare someone persona non grata, we say, for acting in a manner incompatible with his or her diplomatic status. It appears that everybody in the consulate was doing that. The number of Chinese going in every day. We also hear that a lot of espionage was being encouraged. Money was being distributed. Help was being provided to Chinese who were being accused by the Americans of not doing things that should be done. And then there is a substantial Chinese diaspora, but there were a number of things that they were doing which they should not have done. Now, in the United States, sir, there are very tough laws. I've served in Washington against environmental pollution. And I don't mean this as a joke. Every time we celebrate Diwali every year, the Indian community, wherever in the US, we take permission from the local police and we use firecrackers that don't emit smoke. So here, when you are using not spreaders, but incinerators to burn your documents and the smoke is billowing, it's a violation of their laws. I mean, they're absolutely right, the police, to respond to this and say, buddy, are you on fire? Your minds might be, but are you physically on fire? So I understand that the shredding of the documents or incineration, they are trying to protect something. Every country has certain classified information. But the extent of the fire leads me to suspect that it wasn't just the unclassified document, it was a lot more, probably dossiers on each one of the Chinese nationals or Chinese expatriates living in Texas or the area of jurisdiction of the Consulate General.
General Katoch, obviously this was done keeping in mind the security under threat because of the Chinese consulate's presence in the fourth largest city in the United States, which is Houston. And obviously the Americans have gone on to say that they have taken this move, they have made this particular gesture because they want to protect American intellectual property and America's private information as well. How much do you think this has to do with India banning those 59 applications and the United States also getting some sort of a whirlwind message that something similar is also being done to them via China and they need to protect their interests?
Vineet, you have observed that this trade war between the United States and China has been ongoing for the past 2+ years. And trade and technology forms the basic component of that trade war. Now, what China has been doing consistently, as so rightly highlighted by Professor Nalpat and Ambassador Vora, is they have been actually, I will use the word cheating, on various trade protocols, etc. All right, you actually go and steal intellectual property, right? You are keeping an eye on Chinese citizens, I beg your pardon, US citizens of Chinese origin, right? Now, all those factors are coming in, and if you're looking at Houston, where the Americans told just 3 days back, they told them that by Friday evening you got to get out. They gave them 72 hours, and Houston is a place which has got a very large Chinese people of Chinese origin. So obviously these people were keeping very, very strict tabs on the Chinese. I'm quite certain they will be keeping dossiers. There would be a great deal of technological espionage taking place. Now, the question is, once they've been given 72 hours to move out, you cannot move out with all these documents because there is a fear that once they move out, they are no longer in Chinese territory. So long as you are within the consulate, that is considered as a sovereign territory of China, right? But once you move out, it's no longer sovereign. Now, that fear is there. If these papers get out, what will happen? Now, obviously, there will be some element of classified which every country keeps. But when we're looking at the amount of papers which have been burned, because I actually saw that video, that is truly mind-boggling. And very rightly, the fire department was called out. So I think what has happened now is that we are looking at the US-China relations plummeting even further. And obviously, the Chinese are going to retaliate. The Americans have got five of the consulates in China. They have already closed Wuhan in January, and they haven't come back, again, much to China's displeasure. But they've got 4 more. And I presume China will retaliate on any one of them. Each of these countries have 5 consulates in each other's countries. So as America has closed one, in retaliation, obviously, China will close one. Now, will this escalate further? We don't know. But I feel that in any escalation which takes place, I think it is the Chinese who are going to be the losers, especially as related to trade and technology.
Pramit, do you think this is just another step, another stage in the de-escalating, decadent bitter rivalry between the United States and China, or do you think this is something which will pass over?
Well, I think that the key is the technology story. The Americans have been very clear that more than anything else, they see China's theft of technology on a gargantuan scale. I mean, some of their estimates are literally hundreds of billions of dollars worth of technology have been taken by the Chinese. And for the Americans, they believe that this is been the primary motive, if you wish, for a lot of what China has done on the international economic front. And that China's view is that their future economic progress will be requires them to go up the value addition ladder. But rather than investing in R&D in the way that you would have expected, their basic game is just go out and steal technology from other countries. They've done this in Europe. They've done it to some degree from Japan, but America's obviously being the primary target because it just has more of the kind of technology they want. Houston, for example, is the Consulate General in Houston covers a large portion of the American South and West. So it covers not just Houston, which itself is an aerospace, defense, and shale technology center. It is the capital of shale oil technology in the United States. It also covers Austin, Texas. The high-tech corridor there, for example, is in one of the biggest centers. It's called the Silicon Hills. One of the reasons that George W. Bush was so impressed by India without ever having visited the country was that when he was governor of Texas, he used to meet the high-tech corridor entrepreneurs in Austin. And as he himself told me once, he said 8,000 of them were Indians. And he said after this, he turned to his staff and he said, I don't know what's happening in India, but these Indians are brilliant. We need to work with these people. So Texas is an enormous, it's the second largest renewable energy hub in the country, solar, wind technology out of Houston, plus it's an oil and gas center. So it's obviously a place the Chinese would, for obvious reasons, be taking large amount of technology. As General Katorch has correctly said, the Chinese government has in the past few years also declared effectively that anybody of Chinese genetic origin, irrespective of what their passport may be or where they have been born, is a citizen of China and must follow the orders of Beijing. And they are deliberately going around selecting scientists, students, prominent people of Chinese origin in other countries, and basically saying, we know where your relatives are. Your relatives live in mainland China, and they are now hostage, so you have to work for us. So if you're a scientist, you better give us the information you need. And as has been mentioned, the huge mountain of paper that was being burnt by the consulate indicates that their own incinerators and shredders were simply not enough to handle the amount of paper that they had. And keep in mind, they were keeping it on paper, which means they were not keeping it on online databases, which had automatically been hacked by American intelligence. They were deliberately trying to keep this firewalled from anybody else getting in. So you could be pretty certain it was material, as the ambassador correctly said, inappropriate to their actual diplomatic activity. So the Americans obviously forced the limit by giving them only 3 days to shut it down, and have basically said, we don't take technology from China, so you can close down all the consulates you want of ours. But it's a very clear escalation of what is happening. I should point out that a lot of other minor things that we are missing are happening on the American side. It's not just the aircraft carriers, those are the big visible things. For example, they canceled an audit agreement between the United States and China, which means that Chinese companies now are seen, their auditing of their accounts will no longer be accepted by the United States as fulfilling American requirements. What does this mean? That means every Chinese company that is now listed on an American stock exchange can effectively be evicted because they are not following the audit requirements of the New York Stock Exchange. We don't care what your Chinese, even if it's PwC in China, it's no longer accepted by the United States. So they're actually driving these Chinese companies out. If you look at the Chinese FDI figures into America last year, they have collapsed by 95%, which means effectively they're getting no clearances from the American side, or American companies saying, we're not allowed to touch you, I'm sorry. Chinese students are being told to leave. American professors, a Harvard professor was arrested by the FBI for dealing with his Chinese counterparts and giving them information that the American government deemed inappropriate. sensitive. These are the signals that the Americans are clearing. We want to rip the entire technology relationship with you in every single way we can. And we don't care what the consequences are. So this is just, I mean, we're just seeing the beginning of an escalation. Some of them are relatively invisible, but what you saw in Houston was a very clear sort of torpedo across the bows, if you wish. And America, I'm sure, is planning to do a lot more.
Professor Nalapal, a very interesting point made by Pramit over there that, we keep talking about, the stuff that is visible, but what's going on in the back channels also is something that needs to be brought out. America has clearly recognized that China was looking to replace them, and they have finally woken up to the fact that they no longer can sustain that reality.
Well, I'd like to say that Pramit is absolutely right. And for example, money, hundreds of billions of dollars of American money, the savings of pensioners, the savings of widows, the savings of orphans, all kinds of savings have been completely lost because of the fake accounting that has been accepted legally by the American side. And because of this, there's been immense pressure to delist a lot of Chinese companies. So America has been a source not only of technology, but also of capital. And both these are now being cut. I think it's well known to all of us, Texas, California, Maryland, these are all the centers of not only technology, but the US defense industry. And that is exactly where Chinese are spending a lot of attention on. Texas is one of the hubs of the defense industry and the defense security complex. And there's no doubt that a lot of those papers would have had very interesting reading for the FBI, especially the hundreds of American citizens who would have handed over that data to the Chinese consulate in Houston.
Ambassador Vora, how is China expected to respond now? Obviously, the structure, the edifice that they were looking to erect in the United States and throughout the world finds itself on the verge of being destroyed. How are the Chinese going to react?
They will make the appropriate noises, as our colleagues have said. They'll threaten retaliation, but they are not in a position to retaliate in any meaningful way except asking the Americans to reduce their staff here, there, and everywhere. What is important, sir, and this is something that has not come in the papers, but at the time that our Prime Minister went and we had this massive event called Howdy Modi, you might recall that, some of my friends in Houston said that the Chinese were actually running around with cameras trying to film the thing. They were wondering if one of their leaders came, would they be able to arrange a bigger show? Of course, it never happened because nobody's ever going to be able to repeat that show. But the whole idea, the whole purpose of the Consulate General of China, and I passed by that building, the number of antennas sticking out of it, it's almost like it was the People's Liberation Army headquarters in wherever their headquarters are. The whole thing is that these fellows have now developed some kind of masochistic freak, and I'm talking about the Chinese, that they just enjoy being hurt. Their ability to retaliate today against the world is limited. So you've seen what the American Secretary of State has talked about after his meeting with his British counterpart, that an international coalition should come together to force the Chinese to behave as any responsible nation should. Well, good luck if you think they're going to behave as other countries do. It's actually a coalition of the angry that is spontaneously coming together. People saying enough is enough. We don't want any more of this nonsense from China. So they will make the appropriate noises. They'll scream and shout and yell, but they are not going to be able to retaliate in any meaningful way because, as you can see, the confrontation, it's a gradual ladder of escalation. It's political, it's economic, as you know, from the sanctions and so on, and Chinese companies not being able to raise funds in the United States. It's military. You've seen what's happening with the aircraft carriers that pass by. And now it's intellectual also. Their students are being told, well, nice knowing you, thank you, but goodbye, go back home. The professor being arrested. There'll be many more such cases under that 1,000 talents program that the Chinese launched, etc., etc. The reality is that apart from Western money and technology that enable China to develop, now having reached a plateau, the Chinese realize the only way forward is cheat, steal, cajole, and do what you have.
General Katosh, do you think that the events which are transpiring in the South China Sea, what's happening at the LAC, what's going on in Hong Kong, and what the United States is doing to China right now. What kind of a bearing will this have on the Chinese economy and the international morale as well? China has been extremely fast in terms of its growth in the last few years. Do you think they in fact stand at a pedestal where all that progress that they made in the last few decades is going to be shattered, or rather on the verge of being shattered?
I think China will face very serious economic losses, but unfortunately, it won't be confined just to China. I think the whole world, as such, including India, we are going to face very severe economic challenges. And that holds true both for Europe and for the United States. Now, the question is, how much pain are we ready to bear? As the ambassador very correctly said, how much pain is China ready to bear? Now, in my view, when we look into the Chinese being told to get out of Houston, their consulate, to close their consulate at Houston, I think they have absolutely no option. They have to close one of the American consulates. Otherwise, they will lose what is proverbially called face. Now, the Americans have already vacated Wuhan, and they vacated that in January. So will China tell them to actually close Wuhan? That will be an indicator that they are trying to save face, but at the same time, nothing has really changed on the ground. But if they close some other consulate, right? Each consulate they close, and if the Americans retaliate, I think each time you close a consulate, it is the Chinese who will be the losers. As Pramit very rightly said, it is a question of technology, of technology or stealing technology, and you can only do that if your consulates are there. So I think China has overreached. Actually, they overreached in their attempts in the South China Sea, and I think they overreached in Eastern Ladakh. And when they overreached in Eastern Ladakh, that really set the alarm bells off, because that is the time when India took a firm stand and we said no. And we are still in a very we are still in a stage by which there is no resolution as of now, right? So we can say it is still a very vulnerable stage, a stage where anything may happen. We may get down to peace, but that peace is not something which can be taken as a guaranteed peace. So the world is now taking notice that if China is prepared to go to this lengths to become what they call the second pole, right, in a bipolar world, they are not going to stop. So I think the world has got together. This is the message emanating from America, from Europe, and from India. I think China has to be stopped, and we have to stop them using whatever means are available, especially economic means.
All right, just a minute left into the conversation. Pramit, do you think after what America has done, other countries could also follow suit? Because it's not only the United States that have a bone to pick with them.
Well, you've already seen Japan announce a $1 billion fund for Japanese companies to leave China and move out to preferably back to Japan, but the Japanese have said that you can go to other countries as well. You've seen a number of other countries make similar announcements. The European Union is slowly starting to coalesce around a similar position, definitely countries like Sweden. You saw Britain, of all countries, suddenly announce that they're going to shift their aircraft carrier, single aircraft carrier, to the Pacific. So you're seeing definitely a slow but steady consolidation, if you wish, against China, but it still remains highly fragmented. It needs to be put together in a more solid way. But China...
We've run out of time, Pramit. We've in fact run out of time. Ambassador Vora, with just about 30 seconds for you to put in your point. I saw your finger go up, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muller. Just wanted to say the millions of people watching this show, please see this Bloomberg report that came out 2 days ago. It says that China's Lehman moment, the Lehman Brothers, when they collapsed in the United States, is round the corner. I believe that totally, sir.
All right. Well, appreciate you joining us, gentlemen.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.